Good evening. I'm Phil Herron, editor of the Daily Times and DelcoTimes.com. Welcome back to another edition of our live stream internet program. We call this little show Live from the Newsroom. It's where we take the people who are making some of the headlines that are making news here in Delaware County. We bring them into our newsroom in beautiful downtown Primos and we talk about the issues of the day. We're out on the road again tonight. We're making our monthly trip to the beautiful Freedom Hall here on the campus of Widener University in Chester, our home away from home. We have a great partnership with the people here at Widener, with the communications department. We get the ability to come in and use their dynamic studio as part of their communications program, which is based here in Freedom Hall. And some of the students who work in the communications department under the tutelage of Tim Sapansky get to use us as practice for their studies, and they actually work behind the scenes and produce the show. We are almost a little less than 2 weeks away from a fairly important event here in the state of Pennsylvania. We are going to go to the polls and we are going to elect a governor as well as the entire state House of Representatives, a couple of very key state Senate positions, as well as 2 congressional seats here in Delaware County, those being the 1st District and the 7th Congressional District. I brought in a couple of very good panelists. We're going to talk tonight about politics in Delaware County and the November elections. To my immediate left is our good friend here from Widener, political science professor Wes Leckrone, and out to his left, out on my far left, my featured Wednesday columnist in the Daily Times and DelcoTimes.com, Chris Friend. Wes, we'll start with you. We're going to start right at the top of the ballot. Lo and behold, having been the only person, I think, in the state of Pennsylvania who several months ago predicted against all reason that the governor would in fact be reelected, and only to see the polls consistently show him down double digits. We have a poll out earlier this week that shows, in fact, that the race is getting a little bit closer. One particular poll, albeit driven a GOP poll, had the gap down to 7 points between the governor, Tom Corbett, the Republican incumbent, and the Democratic challenger, York businessman Tom Wolf. What's going on? Why is the gap getting a little bit smaller?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. The first is, depending on who they actually use in the poll, can make a substantial
I think they talk to me.
Right. So sometimes what they do is they weight the amount of Republicans in these polls, given historical kind of turnout in elections. So that can bridge the gap a little bit. But I think more than that, what we see is that Governor Corbett had a tough time with his own political party, with sure Republicans. Did. And I think what the numbers show in the polls is that Republicans are starting to come home to Tom Corbett, and there's a larger share of the Republicans that are now saying that they're going to support Governor Corbett. And for him to have any chance of winning, that's definitely, he's got to pull from his base. Not necessarily that they're going to vote for Tom Wolf, but that they might not show up at all.
Chris, you've probably been the polar opposite of me. I think your opinion of the governor and his sort of troubled term in Harrisburg has been pretty clear. Are you surprised that the gap is narrowing?
I don't really think the gap's narrowing as much as that poll says. Again, it's a Republican-leaning poll firm. Take that with a grain of salt. I think what you'll see at the end of the day is probably somewhere around a little bit, maybe north of 40% for the governor. I mean, I think it'll probably be somewhere between 15, 18%. I think best case scenario, you're looking at, 12 to 14% deficit. Yeah. And, he's going to be he's one of the few Republican governors nationwide that will lose, and maybe the only one come election night.
Right. And he will, if in fact that is the case, which is one of the things that I have been banking on, he will certainly fly in the face of what this state's history has been. Ever since we've given the governors the ability to seek a second term, no incumbent in Pennsylvania has ever lost. What we do instead is we give each party 8 years and then we flip the other way. We'll go 8 years with a Republican and then we'll go 8 years with a Democrat. So, Chris, you're saying that you're pretty confident that the Pennsylvanians are going to fly in the face of that kind of tradition?
You can put it in the bag at this point. And I say that, everyone should go out. Certainly we encourage people to vote. But at this point, I really think if there's any race you're ever going to say is inevitable, I think this is it. Yeah. And, Tom Corbett's not done a very good job at getting his message out. Yeah. Some of the things that he has accomplished are, the biggest tax increase for gasoline, biggest in the entire nation. It really has alienated quite a bit of his base. Some certainly will come back because they don't want to see Tom Wolf, but I think a lot either won't come out or they're just not. They won't vote for Wolf. They just won't vote at all. The big question is what's the turnout going to be like? I don't think you're going to see a big Republican turnout because there really is no reason to, especially down here in the Southeast where there's not a whole lot of competitive races.
A reminder to our viewers, we're an online show. We've been taking questions. We'll get to some of those in a little bit for our panel. You can also log on to delcotimes.com, take part in our chat. Wes, one of the things that I've been sort of fascinated by over these last 3.5 years is this notion that people, for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure why, are surprised at what Tom Corbett did. And I'm not sure why anybody would be surprised, because the fact of the matter is, Tom Corbett went to Harrisburg and did exactly what he said he was going to do. He ran on a campaign. He pledged that he was not going to raise taxes. Rightly or wrongly, that painted him into a fairly tight corner, and I think he's paid a steep price for that. But the economy, he had serious economic issues when he came into office that were left on his doorstep by the previous governor, Ed Rendell. The economy of the state did not rebound as well as it did in some other parts of the state. But, in retrospect, I'm wondering, does he double think the idea of that whole no tax pledge which got him into this corner in the first place?
Well, I think so. And he did that in the Republican primary, and I'm not really sure he needed to do it to begin with, right? So that was somewhat of a difficult thing to happening there. But I think, you definitely saw what was coming. I think the difference with Corbett, though, is that he hasn't been conservative enough to bring the conservatives into the fold. Mm-hmm. So he's not like a guy like Scott Walker in Wisconsin, who's a firebrand conservative, right? So he's done some things like, a relationship to not kind of following up on the gay marriage decision. Mm-hmm. He didn't choose to kind of keep going forward with the voter ID. We've got the gas tax that Chris mentioned. And then you throw in the whole Penn State thing, which riles people up in central Pennsylvania. And he kept his pledge not to raise taxes, which kind of irritated people that are in the middle, but he did enough stuff to irritate people on the right. So he's nobody's friend at this point.
Let me just have one quick thing. Typical Tom Corbett, though. For 4 years, he's been adamantly opposed to the shale tax, the tax on the Marcellus shale natural gas. And a huge issue that Tom Wolf has made. And yet last week he comes out and says, well, I actually am open to it at some point moving forward. Well, wait, so for 4 years you're 100% not going to happen, and now at the last minute you're going to say I'm open? It makes him look wishy-washy. Again, another reason that alienates a lot of his base.
One of the, obviously we've spent an incredible amount of time in this election. The overriding issue has been education, in part because of the fact that rightly or wrongly, fingers across the state again got pointed at the governor because of his budgets in his first 2 years. Let's talk a little bit about this whole idea of the famous, or maybe we should be better put, infamous $1 billion cut. Now, the governor's version of this is, hey, don't look at me. Governor Rendell, who preceded me, was basically filling in all these potholes that were in the budget with these federal stimulus funds. And then when I came into office, they pulled the rug out, pulled the stimulus funds back, and then I had some hard choices I had to make. Are you buying that argument, Wes?
Well, this is one of those rare times in which I think both sides can use the facts without lying.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so, yes, there were the budget cuts. You can blame it on the end of the stimulus funds. But what happened was, after that, while they did raise the amount of funding that went to education across the state share remained relatively the same.
Right.
But a lot of that additional money did not go towards actual school resources, but rather went towards funding pension plans.
Right.
So while there may be a record amount of spending on education, it's not necessarily going to the schools, and that's what causes the problem. So both sides have some facts, it's just how the public perceives them.
Chris, the Democrats have been, solid on this. One of the things that they pointed out after, finally, one of the things that I've always been surprised at is it took, and it's kind of been almost his emblem, it took Tom Corbett, 3 years to try to deliver his own story. He allowed everyone else to basically paint the picture of, hey, he's the guy who cut $1 billion out of education.
Well, that's exactly right. And you can't make up in 3 weeks of campaign ads 3 years of not using the bully pulpit, of not even just having a conversation with the Pennsylvanians and saying, look, this is the situation, this is what I inherited, this is what we did, here's the story. He's never been a communicator. He's never articulated the message, and education, more than anything else, has just buried him. And that narrative was written 3 years ago, and that is one of the major reasons why, he's not going to be able to come out on top.
One of the things that struck me specifically after the first debate, I remember saying to myself, where's this guy been for 3 years? It was startling to me because I thought he actually did quite well in the debates, and in fact, almost seemed like he put Tom Wolf a little bit on the retreat there. Is that just a part of his personality, Wes?
Well, what's so funny about that was he actually said, maybe I haven't gotten my message across well enough, right, during the debate. I think it's just the prosecutor in him. I think he's more of a prosecutor than he is a politician. I don't think he rose through the ranks the same way a guy like Ed Rendell did.
Right.
And he's not as good at that kind of retail politics as some governors are.
And the other thing is that, when you want to talk about a PR machine and a person who knows image and how to go about presenting things, it probably didn't help him to be following Ed Rendell. I mean, I don't think we're going to see Tom Corbett jumping into pools with any little kids anytime soon. But let's take a look at the county in terms now. We ran another story that appeared in the Sunday Times just last weekend. The interesting thing is that the county continues to drift away from what has always been a bastion of GOP power. The truth of the matter is now that there are, in fact, more registered Democrats in the county than there are Republicans. That gap is getting a little wider. An influx of people that are coming into the county and bringing with them Democratic roots with them. And yet one of the things that we pointed out that Andy Riley, the chairman of the county Republican Party, is always pointing out that when you gauge people who actually vote, who actually get to the polls, the GOP still has a slight margin. And I suppose now what you're talking about really are those two machines, Republican and Democrat, on election day, pushing people out to the poll. In light of that, in light of those numbers, does it almost become a little bit advantageous to see things getting a little more competitive? Whereas the opposite of that, you could have had people say, hey, look, this thing's being decided. Why bother to go out and vote? Whereas now it seems like, at least with the hint of it being a contested race, it could drive more people to the polls.
Yeah, I definitely think it's the advantage to the Democrats to have this race be a little bit more competitive. Mm-hmm. What's not going to happen is the independents will not show up, right? So you're driving your base. These types of elections do not bring the independents out. So it's who can you get to the polls, and if you can get your people to the polls, and that's why you'll see Barack Obama coming in and Michelle Obama coming in, because they appeal to the people here in the Southeast.
Right. Chris, this is I guess, a little different view for the county Republican Party. They're looking at where these numbers are going in the county. They realize now that when you look at the county as a whole, they no longer have the huge. It wasn't that long ago when they had a 3-to-1 advantage in the county, and they wielded that power immensely. They've clearly been very, very successful in keeping their grip on the county courthouse. It's been almost impenetrable to Democrats, and yet we see glimpses. You see, especially on the eastern end of the county in Upper Darby, we've seen races there. When Mario Severa left the State House, that state legislative seat went to the Democrats. We've seen in particular in presidential races that they have, the county has started moving Democratic. That obviously is something that has to be on the minds of the Delco GOP.
Absolutely. Delaware County's not gone Republican for president since 1988.
Right.
And that's a long time. And you're right, it is definitely trended to the Democrats. The Republicans still have a very well-oiled machine. They can still generate, voter turnout, better than most out there. But what has to be disconcerting is when you look 4 years ago, it's the biggest Republican year since 1946 nationwide. And Tom Corbett and Pat Toomey, who both obviously won, both lost Delaware County.
Right.
So if you're losing that as the gubernatorial candidate in the best year,
Yeah.
and clearly you're going to lose now, that the question is how much will Corbett lose and how much will that drag down the rest of the GOP slate in Delaware County, and will it be enough to sink a number of the other candidates?
Right.
That's going to be the big question.
It seems to me that, obviously a lot of people are focused on the Philadelphia suburbs, especially when in terms of the governor's race. The fact of the matter is the trend that is happening here in Delaware County, those numbers are being carried out in Montgomery County, Bucks County. The only place that still holds a fairly substantial GOP majority is Chester County. Why is it that, the governor, he can't make up that kind of margin in other parts of the state? Is he landlocked? He's got to have X amount of votes here from the Southeast?
Well, we account for about a third of all the votes in the state.
Yeah.
And, if you take a look at kind of the electoral map, it's possible to win this state by only winning about 6 counties. So you
Right.
throw a southeastern PA, you throw in Erie, you throw in Allegheny, and
Right.
maybe Luzerne, and that's all that you need in the
Yeah.
state. So,
Right.
and the problem is that the rest of the state, again, with the problem with the conservatives that he's having,
Right.
if he had his base locked up, then you could say, okay, we can come into the southeast and we can, we can just pick off a couple votes, maybe we can win. But
Right.
he hasn't consolidated his base. So.
Chris, I know that you've espoused on any number of occasions that there was an issue that was, rooted in the Jerry Sandusky investigation and the way Tom Corbett, as Attorney General, handled that investigation. It hasn't really been talked about that much, but you still think that that's in people's minds?
I do. You know what, Phil? I think it's one of those issues that's not really being polled right now. And again, because the race is maybe a foregone conclusion, that's why a lot of your big national polling firms
Right.
out of your media outlets have not really polled it here because they're looking elsewhere. But Jerry Sandusky and the way that it was handled is still gets a lot of people very, very upset. Pennsylvania has one of the largest alumni networks of any state in the country in terms of Penn State alumni. Half of those people think he put Joe Paterno in his grave prematurely. The other half believe he left the child molester on the street way too long for political reasons. They've been salivating now for a number of years to get their revenge on Tom Corbett. And I think it's not just Jerry Sandusky in and of itself, but a much broader issue is if you can't trust this guy to run a competent campaign where there's still so many questions that people do deserve answers to, he won't answer those questions, then how can he be trusted to run the state? And I think you've seen with all the way the state's been, that's why he's down.
Right.
So, there's one really interesting fact. If you take a look at the primary election in Center County, which is where State
Right,
College is located, there were 8,000 people who wrote in a candidate other than Tom Corbett in the Republican primary there.
There you
And
go.
that gives you a little bit of an idea of how this is hurting
Yeah.
him.
Well, one of the things that sort of has struck me in this campaign, and I'll gauge both of your opinions on this and see if it holds true with you as well. I get this distinct feeling that an awful lot of people in this state are not necessarily voting for Tom Wolf, but there's a lot of people in this state who are going to vote for anybody who's not named Tom Corbett.
Yes.
You think that?
That's the short of it. And the Democrats nominated the perfect candidate to be the not Tom Corbett,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, here's Tom Wolf, a very mild-mannered person who could not upset anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, he's very likable person.
Yeah.
He's somewhat bland, which is exactly what you want to run in a campaign
Yeah.
where you're running against a very unpopular incumbent.
Chris?
But absolutely. I mean, I concur. There's, from the beginning, it became anyone but Corbett.
Yeah,
And
right.
and I think you still see that now. And again, as a businessman, Tom Wolf's business resume does interest a lot of people. And people are saying, you know what, it's time to run government like we run a business, a little bit more efficiently,
Yeah.
cut out some of the waste. Hey, maybe a business guy can do it. And I think those credentials have won over a number of Republicans as well, as some of the polls
Right.
show.
All right, let's turn to probably what is, in fact, aside from the governor's race, maybe the most talked about race in the state, and that is this race for the open state Senate seat in the 26th district, which encompasses a lot of Delaware County, a sliver of Montgomery and Chester County as well. And that was created by the fact that a longtime Republican Senator Ted Erickson is retiring, and that pits the Republican chairman of Delaware County Council, Tom McGarrigle, against Union leader John Kane from Ridley Township. And again, here you see a very, very stark shadow over this by the governor's campaign by the fact that the Republican candidate, the chairman of Delaware County Council, basically came out on day one of this campaign and said, I'm basing my campaign on enactment of a 4% or 5% or 4 or 5% extraction tax on the drillers in the Marcellus Shale area. I want to use every dime of that to education. Probably not exactly what Tom Corbett needed to hear, Wes.
No, it wasn't. But if you're going to appeal to a very kind of competitive district, you have to appear not to be overly ideological. Yeah. You have to be a can-do person. A person, McGarrigle's basically running on the fact that I can run government efficiently and well. And as a consequence of that, one way is to say, look, let's tax these oil companies that are taking out our natural resources, and let's take that money and put it towards education. Yeah. Right? That's a win-win to suburban voters.
Right. Chris, one of the things that got pointed out, obviously there's no way that Tom McGarrigle would run away from it, is the fact that, and John Kane has pointed this out on a couple of occasions, is that he had several years, consecutive years of tax hikes. Probably not what he wanted to hear. Now they just announced that this year they're going to manage to avoid a tax hike. Can John Kane muster enough with that to win this race?
Phil, if on Labor Day you would ask me who was going to win this race, I thought it was John Kane's to win. He would have to do something to lose the race. I think the momentum has shifted. The McGarrigle campaign is very efficient at responding within 2 or 3 days to any attack on TV. You're getting a flyer in your mailbox, quickly. But the Kane campaign seems to have gotten completely off message. In the beginning, they were tying, McGarrigle with these tax increases. Right. I think 4 or 5 consecutive, tax increases, tying him to Tom Corbett, tying him to the biggest gas tax in the nation. They've gotten away from that, and I think the campaign of John Kane is foundering right now. And McGarrigle has been very effective at hammering home some of the issues as a union labor leader that have a lot of people's eyebrows raised, and they're not really responding very well.
Right. Wes, is there a problem here a potential problem for Tom McGarrigle in Republicans being disillusioned with the governor's race and staying away?
I think not so much, because he's really kind of crafting his message as being an independent Republican, or at least not a Tom Corbett Republican, and trying to run on a track record of who he is and what he wants to do in the future. Right. So I think that's the type of thing that suburban swing voters like to hear is, I'm a partisan, I'm a Republican, but don't sign me up for the entire platform.
Yeah. Chris, one of the astounding things that has come to the fore in this, even in a state Senate race, it ain't cheap out there. They are spending an awful lot of money. They're going to spend $5 million in a state Senate race.
That's exactly right. And I mean, they're all over TV. It's network TV, it's cable TV, you name it. Again, very expensive flyers out there. There's no shortage of money on either side. So, again, they're both trying to get their message out. I just think that recently the Kane campaign has gotten somewhat off message, and McGarrigle has been effective at hammering that home. As far as the turnout goes, it's a myth overall that people split their ticket. That doesn't really happen. You've seen big momentum shifts among the electorate, 2006, 2008, 2010. In this district, they will split their ticket somewhat. The question is, how badly will Corbett do? If Corbett, if Wolf gets 60%, McGarrigle may still be able to win. At some point, mathematically, though, as that number goes up, it's going to be impossible for McGarrigle to win. So it's obviously in McGarrigle's interest to have Tom Corbett keep it as much as he can above 40% to give McGarrigle a chance. Otherwise, there's not going to be enough people that will split Wolf McGarrigle.
Mm-hmm. Wes, give me a call on the McGarrigle Kane race.
That's a tough one. I think for the reasons Chris just mentioned, with Wolf pulling the ticket here, I think it's gonna. I think McGarrigle's not going to win. I think it'll be Kane.
You think really do? Okay, yeah. Chris.
At this point, again, we have the last 2 weeks are always going to be the most explosive. I would give the edge very slightly to McGarrigle right now. I mean, look, when you look at the Kane campaign, there's a couple of questions that come to mind. First of all, what were these guys thinking prior? If you're going to have a union leader become your candidate, that's kind of a polarizing position for half the county. But they're making a lot of money, a lot of hay over the fact that he makes $276,000 a year, which may not be entirely accurate. But again, Kane wasn't coming out and said, "Yeah, some of that was for retirement for my kid's college."
Right.
But the big issue is, what are you going to do with your job should you become senator? Will you give it up? And his answer so far has been, "No, I'm going to keep both."
No intention.
That is really rubbing people the wrong way.
Yeah.
That's something that clearly should have been discussed, strategized before even announcing your candidacy. Now they're being reactive instead of proactive. They've gotten off the message of comparing McGarrigle to Tom Corbett and so forth. I would give McGarrigle a slight edge as of now.
Yeah, I still think that, specifically because of the fact that in that 26th district, there's still a sizable Republican majority there. That has not been quite as affected as some other areas of the county in terms of the drift over to Democrats. One other odd sort of similar circumstance that we have, again created by a retirement. Amazingly enough, for the first time in more than 3 decades, in 163rd House seat, which represents Upper Darby, Alden, Lansdowne, and there, someone not named Mikosi is going to be sitting in that seat. We have a Democrat, Vince Rangione, who's going to be running against Upper Darby Councilman Jamie Santora. Chris, your quick take on that race?
I just don't think the Republicans are going to hold this. The demographics for that district have changed, and it's going to be very, very difficult to hold that. I think that seat goes Democrat.
Wes, we saw that when the very similar decision, Mario Severa decided it was time for him to get out of Harrisburg, and I think he saw the writing on the wall in that demographic that Chris mentioned. You see the same thing happening here in the 163rd?
I think since I just said Kane would win, I got to do the same thing here as well, right?
All right, we'll get down to the big call and the final call, and I guess I think I know where this is going to go. Chris, we'll start out there with you. Give us a rundown for what happens in the gubernatorial race.
I think it's Wolf 59%. I think the Republicans will end up. Clearly, they're going to keep the state house. They will probably they'll keep the state senate as well. Nationally, it's going to be a Republican year. Republicans should get 51, potentially 53 in the U.S. Senate. Yeah. Congress will pick up a few seats as well. It's going to be a Republican year, except for Tom Corbett.
Right, Wes.
I think that the governor will tighten it a little bit. I think he'll probably lose it by about 12 points in that neighborhood. Republicans keep control of both houses of the state legislature and take over the Senate, but it makes no difference in Washington if they do or not.
One of the things that was talked about in this 26th district state Senate race is that the idea with the, within striking distance with a 27-23 margin for the Republicans in the state Senate, they were looking at a few key races, and this is probably one of them. One of the things that Governor Corbett has been criticized for, and I think rightly so over the last 4 years, is that how little he's been able to get accomplished, even though he has majorities in both the Senate and the House. So let's say that it plays out the way that some people think it would, with Republicans holding control in both the Senate and the House. If Tom Corbett had problems getting things done, how is Tom Wolf going to govern?
I think it's going to be very difficult. Basically, I think that the Republicans have stonewalled as much as they can against Governor Corbett, who's one of their own. Yeah. The only way I can see to success is trying to build some sort of consensus, picking off a couple of Republicans that would support the severance tax on the Marcellus Shale for the purpose of education. And I think that might be the big thing that they might be able to get accomplished. But that's going to be difficult in the House. Chris, any hope of anything that along the lines of bipartisanship out there?
I think it's possible. Look, Tom Wolf ran a very good campaign in the primary. His campaign in the fall has not been particularly good. He's made a couple of policy positions out there. One's a graduated income tax, and the political insiders in Harrisburg look at that and say, "What are you talking about? That's a constitutional amendment you'd have to do. Yeah. That's ridiculous." What Tom Wolf needs to do to be effective is to put that kind of stuff out of the way. Go in there and in the first 90 days, do number one, liquor privatization. Get at least a piece of it. Maybe it's 6 packs and wine in the grocery store. Something that Tom Corbett wasn't able to do. He could push for the shale tax, probably get it, because there are enough Republicans that would be willing to support that, and take on some of the issues there that Corbett was not able to do. Will the Republicans be obstructionist, or are they going to be willing to work with them? That's going to be the question. But you can only be obstructionist for so long if there's things that the people want out there. And I think liquor is one of them.
Yeah. It certainly has been always high on the list of things that you talk about. And yet, it was obviously one of the 3 items that was on Governor Corbett's agenda. We've had candidates in the last 2 weeks. And one of the things that the Republican House members have pointed out is that, hey, we passed it. It did pass in the House. The first time ever they passed a privatization. And then, of course, it went over to the Senate and got sort of bollocksed up with the whole transportation package and everything, and it sort of fell apart. What is it, that voters should be looking for? Anything in particular in this next 10 days?
I think it's going to be the status quo. I mean, nothing's really moved the needle very much over the last several months when it's come to the gubernatorial election, and without any debates coming up in reference to that, I don't see anything really happening other than perhaps a major gaffe, which is very unlikely for me to either one of these candidates, who generally is not prone to public gaffes.
Right. Chris?
I concur with what Wes says. Unless you've got a couple of really great killer campaign ads that they're about to unleash, and I'm not sure what they would be right now, because if you're Tom Corbett, you really should have done that before to try and close the gap. It's just such a large gap, and whether it's 12 points or 20 points, it's just so insurmountable that I don't think you're going to see a whole lot that's going to change. Again, the big thing is going to be turnout. Can you motivate your base without any real competitive races? For the most part, in the Southeast, I think you're going to see not a whole lot of Republicans come out. Now the question is, will the Democrats come out if they think, oh, my guy's got it, he's in the bag? This Senate race will certainly drive turnout, and that could be critical.
Well, certainly it's going to be an interesting day on Election Day as we go and elect a governor, a crucial state Senate race here in Delaware County, all of our state representatives, as well as 2 congressmen in the 1st and 7th district. But when we all wake up the day after Election Day, I think we're all going to start thinking about 2016. So as our final send-off here, I will ask you very quickly, Wes, give me some names we ought to start thinking about. Presidential, 2016.
I think, part of it is whether or not Scott Walker wins his gubernatorial race in Wisconsin. I think if he does win, I think he's going to be a darling of the right come 2016. I think he's going to have a good record to run on. I still think Christie can be in the mix, and wouldn't be surprised if a Jeb Bush type establishment candidate gets in there. And then I think it's pretty much Hillary for the Democrats.
You think she's definitely in?
It would be difficult not to see that happen.
Chris?
I think, again, a year ago, if you would have asked me, I don't think Hillary was going to run. I think she was tired. I don't think she wanted it. I think with Christie pretty much imploding, I think this is hers to lose on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, if you go with the Jeb Bush or Mitt Romney, you might as well kiss it goodbye. That's not going to happen. I think Walker is too polarizing. There really is not a deep Republican bench, or really Democratic bench after Hillary.
Right.
I don't see anyone that's emerged right now from the Republican ranks that has any serious gravitas to them. Because I think Christie cannot get over the bridge gate. I think it's going to end up killing him.
All right. There you have it. Quick roundup. We had about 10 days out from election 2014. The consensus being, I guess I've been outvoted to talk about going to the polls, that my belief that Governor Corbett's going to be reelected at this point still looks like a long shot, and we're going to have a real barn burner of a race in the state Senate in 26th district. My thanks to our panel, our good friend Wes Leckrone, a political science professor here at Widener, my columnist Chris Friend. You can see his work every Wednesday in the print edition of the Daily Times, and occasionally on Fridays as well in delcotimes.com. This is live from the newsroom. We've been here on our monthly visit at Widener University. We're here with the communications team at Freedom Hall. We'll be back again next month. Hopefully we'll be back next Wednesday night for another edition live from the newsroom every Wednesday night, even though this is Thursday on a special edition. We'll be back next week, 7 o'clock. We'll talk to you then. Thanks.
show you don't want to miss.
Thanks, Joanne.
It's Google time.